a minute.
Uh,
No, that was a mistake. What do I
okay,
do to turn
that's
it back
fine.
again?
I'll lower the hand for you, so now that's
Okay.
fine.
All right.
Thank you.
Gosh.
Sorry.
Okay, so I think we can start now. And hello and welcome to Sheffield webinar series. My name is Manasi and I am a PhD student at Grantham Center for Sustainable Futures at the University of Sheffield. Thank you very much all for joining us today. Today we have with us Zilla from MYHarvest to talk about sustainable food production in urban agriculture. The session is divided in two parts. First, Zilla's presentation for 45 minutes, and then the question and answer sessions for 30 minutes. You can write your questions, as already mentioned, in the chat box, or raise your hand using the icon on your screen and ask your question by unmuting your microphone. To keep this session interactive, we also have a few polls during the webinar. If you like anything in particular about the webinar, you can post it on your social media accounts with hashtag #ChefYield, which someone will post in the chat box already. So I'm going to quickly by Project Sheffield, and then I'm going to hand it over to our speaker of the evening. The Project Sheffield Sustainable Harvest Empowering Future Food Yield is an initiative by the Grantham Center for Sustainable Futures Green Impact team and is a part of University of Sheffield's Green Impact Network. The team is led by Yana and by PhD students Mary, Meera, Phoebe, and myself. So can you please navigate to the next slide? Yana? Yes, thank you. So, and we also have Esme and Ellie from Green Impact's volunteer team. The project aims to create awareness in the Sheffield community about why and how to grow food sustainably. The project has a website. Next slide, please. Thank you. The project has a website which has blogs and sustainable recipes section. Having said that, we are inviting people to write guest blog articles for the project. If this is something that interests you, kindly get in touch with the team Sheffield via one of our social media accounts. So next slide, please. The project organizes various webinars, and the next one is on 12th of February by Kristen Bash and Mariam Dobson on social, environmental, and public health benefits of growing food. If this is something that interests you, we will be posting the link in the chat box and you can register for free on the Eventbrite link. Lastly, thank you everyone who supported this event and you all for joining us today. Without further delay, I would like to invite Zilla on the stage for this most awaited talk. Thank you. Zilla, the stage is yours now.
Hi, I hope people can hear me all right. And see my presentation slides as well. Oh, there they are. Can I just get some confirmation? Can people hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good, thank you. So thank you for the introduction and thank you all for coming. It's great to see so many people interested in this topic, although it's also quite scary to be having to talk in front of such a large audience. So my name is Zilla and I'm a member of Dr. Jill Edmondson's research group at the Department of Animal and Plant Sciences at the University of Sheffield. My research focuses on urban agriculture, especially urban horticulture in the global north and particularly in the UK. Specifically, I'm looking at how growing fruits and vegetables in cities can contribute to household and citywide food security, urban resilience, and improve nutrition and health of the population. I'm also currently responsible for the management of the MYHarvest Citizen Science project, which I'm going to tell you more about in a bit. Tonight, I'm going to talk about some of the research that we have been doing in our group, focusing on how much food we could grow in urban areas in the UK and what this might mean in terms of potential food security benefits. So before we jump into the question of how much food we could produce in urban areas, I'd like to talk a bit about why we should be growing food in the first place in cities. So Before that, let's just clarify what we mean when we talk about growing food in the city. So for both technical and sociocultural reasons, at least in the global north, we're not really talking about growing cereals or rearing animals, although obviously both of these are possible to a certain extent. Some people do have chickens in the city, but in general, it would not be very efficient really to grow wheat, for instance, on relatively small disconnected patches of land that are typically available in urban areas. And your neighbors might not be too happy with the smell and noise associated with keeping animals nearby. So what we are really focusing on is urban horticulture, which is the production of fruits and vegetables. This can take various forms, including allotments in domestic gardens or community gardens, market farms, and even on rooftops or walls using technological growing methods such as aquaponics or hydroponics. And this can also happen for various purposes, including for own consumption, recreation, or sale. So in the UK, allotment growing is a particularly popular form of urban horticulture and has become even more so since the start of the pandemic, as many people have started to look for alternative ways to spend their time in lockdown, or maybe they were just worried about access to fresh produce. So at the moment, although we have about 300,000 council-run allotments in the country, and there is a massive demand for more growing space, with about 90, sorry, I can never say these numbers right, with about 90,000 people on allotment waiting lists. So in the US, on the other hand, city farms and community gardens are the most common form of urban horticulture, and more of these are being created on vacant lots in inner city areas. It was estimated a few years ago that about 800 million people worldwide were engaged in some form of urban agriculture, and this number has almost certainly grown recently. So I'd like to ask the audience now, do you grow your own food? So, oh yeah, there should be a question appearing on your screen, so if you could just click on your answer. I'll give you a moment to do this. And then we'll also have a second question. Yeah, so actually quite a few of you do grow your own food either on an allotment or in your garden, and there's very few people who've never actually done this. So moving on to our second question, for those of you that don't grow any food, what is your main reason for this? We should have
up the poll.
Sorry, what was that?
Just 1 second while I set up the poll. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sure. Oh, there we go. So our second question was that if you don't grow any food, why is this? Okay, so I'm not sure if that worked. Okay, there we go. So yeah, obviously most of you do grow your own food, so this only applied to those few who don't, but it seems that the main reason is that you don't have the space for it, and obviously you might be busy or feel like you don't know how. So we can move on now to our next question. So why should we grow more food in the city, really? What would be the benefits of this? Well, there are actually several arguments, but before discussing these, we would like to hear what your reason is again. So we have some more questions for the audience.
Just
So
a sec.
Sure. Oh, great. It's come up now. So if we grow your own food, then what is your main motivation? We appreciate that you might have other reasons than these, but if you could just click on the one that best describes you, then that would be great. So what is the final results now? Are any more coming in still? Okay, so it seems like for most people it's engaging with nature or being outdoors and contributing to more sustainable food systems, I think. But people can have all sorts of, oh yeah, we have a lot more answers now. Yeah, but people can have all sorts of reasons for growing their own food. And in addition to this kind of personal benefits, urban horticulture also has a number of important benefits that can take effect on a wider scale. So one of the greatest challenges of our time is achieving food security. We need to feed a growing, increasingly urban population in the face of climate change and various forms of environmental and socioeconomic disturbance, such as pandemics that I'm sure that we've all become too familiar with. And food security is not only about there being enough food for people to eat, they also need to have physical and financial access to foods that provide all the important nutrients that we need for a healthy life. And in fact, food insecurity is now a major issue, not just in developing countries, but in the developed world as well. And of course, we rely on the soil for producing food, which is one of the several essential functions of this crucial resource. So it is a huge problem that not only is the area of productive land limited, but we're also rapidly losing fertile soil as a result of unsustainable practices associated with conventional agriculture. It has been estimated that about a third of the world's arable topsoil has been lost to erosion or pollution in the last 40 years, which is much quicker than the rate at which new soil can form. And just to illustrate the scale of the issue in economic terms as well, soil degradation in the UK is costing over £1 billion each year. Another key issue is that our food systems have become globalized, which does have advantages, but it also means that if supplies are disrupted, as we have seen since the outbreak of the pandemic, it can have serious consequences, especially to the availability of fresh produce with shorter shelf life. In the UK, we're actually importing the majority of fruits and vegetables that we eat, so supply disruptions can have a major impact on our access to these. But it's not just pandemics and natural disasters that can disrupt our supplies. Changes in international relations, for example, can also have a major effect on the price and availability of products. For example, it's expected that Brexit will lead to an increase in the price of imported fruits and vegetables, and that this will likely have an impact on the diets of poorer people who already struggle to afford fresh produce, which tend to be more expensive than energy-rich but more nutrient-poor foods. And obesity and cardiovascular disease are already a major issue in the country, and price increases in these more health-promoting foods will likely exacerbate the problem. So how does urban horticulture help to address these problems? Well, there is mounting evidence that, as well as providing a range of social and environmental benefits, such as improving physical and mental well-being, increasing social cohesion, and decreasing food miles, it could also increase food security on different levels by improving access to fresh, nutritious food, and also increasing the resilience of food systems by diversifying and shortening supply chains, making them less vulnerable to disruption. And we have already seen urban horticulture make a contribution to national food security during the Second World War, when food gardening on allotments and domestic gardens was promoted both in the UK and in the US to aid the war effort. But what is its potential today? So, as I said, urban horticulture has a multitude of benefits, but the social and ecological ones will be discussed in another webinar in this series in February, when my colleague Miriam will talk about some of her research. So if you'd like to find out more of this, then make sure you sign up for that. But today I'm going to focus on urban horticulture's contribution to food security. So how much food could we grow in an urban area? Well, for this we need to know two things, basically. What crop yields we can expect from a certain area of land, and how much space is potentially available that we could use to grow food. So starting with the first question, to get an estimate of the crop yields that small-scale growers could achieve, the MYHarvest or Measure Your Harvest project was designed by my supervisor, Jill Edmondson. This research uses citizen science to quantify the yields of some common homegrown crops in the UK. So data is being collected by several hundred volunteer growers who have been contributing to our database since 2017. So the way this works is people measure the area that they use to grow a specific crop. They weigh their harvests and then submit this data through the MYHarvest website. By doing this, the project has resulted in the first comprehensive UK dataset on homegrown crop yields. And just in the first year, we received data from over 10,000 harvests, measuring 35 tons. And of the 40 crop types that we looked at, some of the most harvested ones by home growers were courgettes, apples, tomatoes, beans, and potatoes. Based on the data that we received in this first year, we estimated that the average yield of homegrown crops was 2.3 kilograms per square meter per year. And when we compared it with commercial horticultural yields, we found that they were actually very similar. So this provides evidence that people can make very efficient use of their growing space, and that home growing could make an important contribution to household food security. So the next question we wanted to ask is, how much space is there for growing food in a city? So in the UK, currently around 1,600 square kilometers of land is used for commercial horticulture, which supplies just over half of the vegetables and only 16% of the fruit that is sold in the country. And actually much of this is grown in the Fens, a region that is majorly affected by soil loss. Now, if we look at urban areas in the country, these cover over 20,000 square kilometers, and about half of this area is green space. So this means that there is about 10,000 square kilometers of urban green space in the country, which is over 6 times the area that we currently use for horticulture. Now, of course, we wouldn't want to turn all urban green space into horticultural land, but still this suggests that there might be quite a significant potential for food production in these areas. To investigate this further, our team used Leicester as a case study to estimate the current and potential food provision by allotments on a city scale. So Leicester has an area of 72 square meters, over half of which is green space, and 1.5% of this is allotment land. So what we did was use geographic information systems and field service of allotment sites to map cultivated areas, and then combine this with yield data from the MYHarvest project. We found that current allotment productivity can feed over 8,500 people in the city. They recommended 5 daily portions of fruits and vegetables. And that if all allotment plots in the city were cultivated, then these could provide enough food for 3% of the population, while still only using 1.5% of urban land. So again, this suggests that allotments could really contribute to local food security. However, there is geographic mismatch between the need, between allotment supply, which are represented by orange dots on the map, and the need for better access to fresh produce for people in more deprived areas, which are the darker grey areas on here, because these are the people who are more likely to be food insecure. And in addition to this mismatch, the availability of growing space has also been declining at an alarming rate. So increasing allotment provision, especially in these more deprived areas, could improve urban food security by providing better access for these people to fresh produce. A recent study by my colleague Miriam found that while allotment area, not just in Leicester but in other UK cities as well, has declined significantly in the past 70 years, particularly in more deprived areas, luckily, a significant portion of allotment land remains green space, so it will be possible to relatively easily restore these sites to their original use. And in many cities, this would be enough to meet demand for allotments, or at least it would have been before the pandemic. So we know that people can make very efficient use of their growing space and achieve high fruit and vegetable yields. And also that current allotment land could already make a notable contribution to local food security. But how much space is there in total in a city that could be used for growing food? So to estimate the area of current and potential productive space in an urban area, our research team used Sheffield as a case study. So again, we use geographic information systems to analyze green and grey infrastructure and measure both the area of land that could be used for traditional soil-based food production and also the area of suitable rooftop space that could be used for controlled environment growing. Then we also combine this data with yield data from the MYHarvest project to estimate how much food could be produced using the available space. So Sheffield has a population of nearly 600,000 and an urban area of roughly 370 square kilometers. And 45% of this is green space. And similar to what we saw in Leicester, 1.3% of green space is allotment land, while a considerable 38% is in the form of domestic gardens. So these maps show different types of spaces in Sheffield, including sealed surfaces, gardens, and sites that were identified as either currently used or potentially suitable as allotment or community growing spaces. So protected natural areas, sites with tree cover and sport pitches and other spaces with specific use were classified as unsuitable for horticulture. But even after excluding these areas, we were left with a substantial amount of space that could be used for growing food. So to be specific, we found that 11% of green space could be converted to allotments, 4% could be used for community-style growing, and there was also a small area of flat rooftops that could be used for potentially very productive controlled environment growing, using techniques like aquaponics or hydroponics. And then we also calculated that currently, allotment holders in the city grow enough food to provide the recommended 5 daily portions of fruits and vegetables for about 3% of the population. And we also estimate that if all suitable space was used for growing food, then we could produce more than enough fruit and vegetables for the whole city. Now, we're not suggesting that we should necessarily use all available space for this, but we wanted to demonstrate that there really is a huge potential. So if we want to be a bit more realistic, we have also calculated that using just 10% of the available green space, including that in domestic gardens as well as allotments, we could still feed 15% of Sheffield's population on all the fruits and vegetables that they need. So we have demonstrated that growing food in urban areas could play a major role in improving local and perhaps even national food security. And although I didn't really talk about these today, there is also growing evidence for its other socio-ecological benefits. Nonetheless, there are still several questions that we need to address to be able to overcome various sociocultural, economic, and sort of technological challenges to increasing the scale of urban horticulture. So these include how much food are we actually producing in urban areas nationally? What would be the impacts of scaling up urban horticulture for food security, nutrition, physical and mental health, and the sustainability of food systems? And what are the trade-offs in terms of biodiversity and ecosystem services provided by different types of green space? And are there any risks to human health, for example, from eating food that was grown in contaminated soil? And how many people actually grow food in their garden at the moment? And how could we encourage more people to get involved? And lastly, how could we make the best use of non-conventional spaces such as walls and rooftops for growing food in built-up areas? So I'm currently working on a couple of projects that aim to address some of these questions, which I'm going to introduce to you now. So the first one is called MYHarvest Diary, which is a participatory project looking at household food security and fruit and vegetable consumption of home growers in the UK. It has basically two main aims. First, to quantify the level of self-sufficiency that home growers can achieve in fruits and vegetables from their own allotment or garden in terms of both the number of portions of their 5 a day, as well as the amount of some key vitamins and minerals that this food can provide, especially those that are often deficient in the UK diet. And second, to see how much fruit and vegetables people who grow their own eat, regardless of how much of this they provide for themselves, and whether this is more than the national average, which is sadly way below recommendations. During last summer and autumn, I recruited nearly 200 people who kindly volunteered to keep a year-long diary in which every week they record the weights of all fruits and vegetables that they harvest from their allotment or garden, get from other growers or forage in the wild, or buy in the shop or at the market. They will also know the amount of food that they're giving away to family or friends outside their household. If anything they had recorded went to waste, whether they froze or preserved anything, and the amount of time that they spent tending to their vegetable plots. So by collecting these data for a whole year, I will be able to estimate how much fruit and vegetables home growers eat on an average day, and also see what percentage of their total consumption comes from their own produce, and what types of crops they're the most self-sufficient in, and also what this might mean to their household nutritional security. The overall aim with this is to understand if home growing could promote more healthful diets and perhaps even help prevent obesity and conditions like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. But it's also been very interesting to learn about various local initiatives and informal networks of exchanging food, and really just people helping each other within the community, which I think is absolutely fantastic and is something that we could all learn from. So the second project I'm working on is analyzing the long-term data that we've been collecting with the MYHarvest project. So specifically, I'm looking at how homegrown crop yields in the UK vary between growing methods. So for example, organic versus non-organic, or greenhouse versus open air, and also between different years, and how this compares with commercial horticulture yields. For example, whether changes in temperature, rainfall might have affected homegrown yields differently. And the second thing I'm looking at with this is the potential contribution of home growing to nutrition. So for this, I will identify both the most frequently grown and the highest yielding crops, and estimate how much of some of the key vitamins and minerals these could provide for people growing them based on the nutritional profiles of these crops. So I've got a question for the audience again. So actually 2 questions. So first, what do you think is the most frequently grown vegetable or fruit based on the 5 years of data that we've been collecting? So yeah, and the right answer actually is in the list. So we'll just give you a few moments for this. All right, shall we see the results? Okay, so it looks like potatoes are the winner, followed by courgettes and then strawberries. All right, let's see, but we have another question first. So which crop do you think typically had the highest yield? Oh, my presentation slides have disappeared. I don't know if...
Sorry, I think I did that by accident. Sorry. I'm gonna...
It's all right.
Slide 39, right?
Around there, yes, please.
39.
Apologies about
Okay,
this.
there it is. Sorry.
Awesome, thank you.
For the next
No
call.
worries. So we were just about to ask the second question about which crop you think might be the highest yielding based on the data that we've collected so far. It should be the last poll question. Oh, there we go.
There it is.
Thank you. Right, shall we see what people voted? Okay, so apples, courgettes, and followed by tomatoes. Right, shall we see the results then? So these are not the official results of this research yet, but so far I've found that some of the most frequently crops are potatoes. So yes, all of those who voted for potatoes, you got it right. But these were followed by courgettes, French beans, onions, and apples. And as for the highest yields, although the actual yield values that I'm showing on this graph might not be quite accurate because there are some potential outliers in the database that still need to be dealt with. It seems that the highest yielding crop was actually cucumbers. So no, it wasn't apples, I think, was the winner in this one. So it is cucumbers, but it is followed by courgettes. So many of you got that right. And then tomatoes, runner beans, and beetroot was actually a very high yielding one as well. Anyway, it will be interesting to see what the final results of my analysis will be. So just to finish off with, I'd like to mention a couple of other things that I'm planning to look at in the near future. So first, obviously, once the social distancing rules are relaxed, which hopefully won't be too long now, I'm planning to do some field work to find out how many people actually grow food in their garden and how much space they use for this and what types of crops they are growing, so that we can assess the current and potential contribution of domestic gardens to food security. And I would also like to do some research on public perceptions of different aspects of urban horticulture to better understand some potential barriers for people to get involved and also hopefully come up with some solutions to help overcome these. That's actually all I had for today, and I don't want to keep people much longer for dinner anyway. So let me just finish my presentation by saying a huge thank you to everyone who's contributed to this research, participants of the MYHarvest and MYHarvest Diary project, my supervisor Jill, and the rest of the research team, and also to EPSRC for funding this work. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it interesting and that maybe you've decided to give food growing a go if you don't already do it. And if you already grow your own food, then perhaps you're considering joining the MYHarvest project, which is still recruiting. I think we are going to have some time for questions now, but if you do need to go, then feel free to contact me afterwards with any questions or comments. You can reach me at the MYHarvest email address that I've put on my last slide. And I've also put the address of the MYHarvest website there. So if you'd like to find out more or take part in the project, then that's the place to go. Thank you.
Okay, time for some questions and answers.
Hi, Jana, that was great. Thank you very much. So we have some questions from our audience, and there's many, so I think we'll have a good discussion.
All right.
Was from John Pollard. Correct me if I'm wrong on the pronunciation. So does the agricultural land area include meat and dairy production, in the sense that is there any comparison or statistics about the production of chickens or rabbits or any other animal?
Do you mean in urban areas or just in agriculture in general? So our research haven't looked at any of that. So we have been focusing on just horticulture. I'm not aware, but there might be some research looking at animal production as well. And as for non-urban production, I'm sure that there is some data available from the government's website on agricultural production in different sectors.
Great, thank you. And he also asked later on if the inputs have been measured in these plots, if they have measured, if they put external compost, manure, water, and if you have any comparison of those inputs with commercial systems. And also, is there any way to measure how many hours the gardeners worked on their plots and again compared it to commercial statistics?
So actually, I think someone else in our research team has collected data on these things. So I can't tell you numbers now, and I'm not entirely sure of what data they have, but there has been some research done on this in our team. And I don't know if we have much data that we can compare in terms of, for example, the time spent gardening. I don't know if this is something that we can really compare to commercial production, but it would be definitely interesting to at least compare the inputs and therefore some aspects of the sustainability of production. What we do know is that about half of the people who take part in the MYHarvest project grow their food organically, and many of them use natural compost and manure added to their soil. So it's definitely a very common thing and a good practice as well.
Great. The next question was from Natasha from the Grantham Center, and she wanted to know about sustainable recipes. You know, how can we ensure our cooked foods are more sustainable?
I feel like this question might not be for me, but more for your Sheffield project. So I don't think I'm the person to answer this really. But
That's right.
I would say, well, sorry, go on.
I was just going to mention that in our project website, there are some recipes that are vegetarian and vegan, so you can look for those there. And the sustainability aspect is that the reduction of meat consumption can reduce the emissions of the production of food. But yeah, what was your comment, Jenna? Zilla, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in general, vegetarian and vegan diets and therefore recipes that are plant-based are more sustainable in this sense. So yeah, I was going to say the same as you did.
Great. So next one was from Mark, and he asked, would community farms be a more efficient use of space than allotments? 40% of the allotments at our site are not cultivated, though most are paid for.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually. So it's one, on the one hand, there's the amount of space and the number of allotments that there are, and there's also where they are and where people would need them. So unfortunately, as they say, there are many allotment plots that are not cultivated at the moment, but these are usually in areas where they're less accessible for people. So it would be really important to create more space in the areas where there is higher demand, and then perhaps find some other use for these unused allotments there. So as for whether community gardens are better use of space than allotments, I don't really know, but I think it really depends on each city and each neighborhood, really, what the best kind of space would be for them to use for growing food. So it's really not a question that there's like one good answer for, I'm afraid.
So our next question was also related to how can we access green spaces for more food production from Laura Lightfinch. So what would be your recommendation for people who are looking to grow their own food?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? So, of course, if you have a garden and if you have space left in your garden that you're not really using for anything else, then obviously that's the first place to go. But if you're not so fortunate, then of course you can look for allotments or community gardens in your area. But unfortunately, as I mentioned in my talk, often the waiting lists are really long for these, so it might take you even years to get space in an allotment, and you might not have a community garden nearby. So if you don't have space in your own garden, then it can be really difficult. And one thing that people could also potentially do is to grow food inside. So I think the last talk in this series by Harry was actually focusing on hydroponics. So it is possible to quite efficiently produce certain crops, like especially leafy things, inside using these technologies. So that might be another option for you. And of course, you can also grow things in pots. But again, if you live in a really small house, then you might not have much space to do this. So yeah, it's really difficult.
Actually, the question of Natalie was related to that. So she was wondering if the data that you mentioned include these balcony gardens and container growing.
No, so I don't think we have any data on that actually, and it would be really interesting to know that as well. It's just one of the things that, as with domestic gardens, this is data that's really difficult to collect. So you would need to actually knock on people's doors and ask them to just get their balcony measured and then look at these small areas that they're using. So no, this would be a really important thing to know, and not something that we actually have much data on at the moment.
I think that would be nice to encourage people who are listening to you, that if they have this kind of growing space in their house, they might share data with you, so you can also have more information. So
yeah, actually, sounds good.
The next question is from Claire, and she mentions that she wonders if there are any issues with air pollution and growing food in areas in the city. If there is an estimation of the square meters one person would need to be self-sufficient, and yeah, those two. What are the problems with pollution? And the other one, how much space would that person need if they wanted to self-sustain?
All right, so for the first question, there are some concerns regarding both soil and air pollution in cities. So some people are worried that if the soil is contaminated with heavy metals or other chemicals, then if you eat food that was grown in it, then that might transfer these residues to you, and this might have potential harmful effects. But this hasn't really. I'm not really sure how much data there is on it, so it's probably best if I don't come to any conclusions. But it really varies, and I think in most cases this is not a very serious concern, but that's just what I think. So as for the air pollution, honestly, I don't know how much data there is on this, or if there is any data. I would think that in general, it shouldn't be a huge concern, because if you imagine you will be spending probably several hours tending to your garden in the city, but you do spend quite a lot of time presumably outside in the city anyway. So if there is air pollution, then you would be affected by that by living there anyway. So growing your own food shouldn't really make this much worse, I think. Sorry, what was the second question?
Just to comment on that, we had also a question from Bob mentioning that there were issues in the 70s, mentioning that the exhaust from vehicles had a lot of lead and it got into the soil. So
right, yeah.
Also, there's this pollutant benzene, which also comes from fuel. So, is there any concern about that?
Yeah, we definitely need to do more research on this and assess this better.
Okay, and the second question from Judith going back was, is there any estimation of how much land would a person would need if they wanted to be self-sufficient?
I think there are actually many estimations, and I don't know if any of them are very accurate. So it really depends on what people mean by being self-sufficient. So self-sufficient as in growing absolutely all the food that they eat, because then you would probably need quite a significant area. So if we're thinking about growing all the cereals that would go into your flour and your bread, then, and especially if you're going to eat meat, then that requires again quite a large area to feed the animals. So if by self-sufficient we mean completely in food, then I would think that's quite a large area, but I don't know the numbers. If we're just talking about fruits and vegetables, then again, I don't know what the exact size of the area would be, but I think that's definitely a more achievable piece of land that you would need for that. And sorry, just with the soil contamination, just one thing I wanted to add is that actually there is some research on this that's being done at the moment in our group. So I can't really say much about this, but there are others who could. So if people just send me a reminder email afterwards, then I can find out some
Right,
more
maybe we
things
can
on
do
this.
another webinar about it, so that could be very interesting. And the next question is related to that self-sufficient. So you were talking about the resilience and how cultivating food in cities could make us could make us have more food available. But what would happen, for example, in winter when there's no growth, especially in northern areas? So that was a question from Judy.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So obviously in this climate we can't grow food year round outside, but this is where these technological cultivations can come in place. So using hydroponics and aquaponics and using indoor spaces, we would be able to grow some food in the winter as well, even. And also, I think even if we are not producing a lot of fruit and veg all year round, just increasing production in the months that we can grow food outside, that could still make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, I agree with that. The next question was from Michelle. She mentions that growing food takes training and skills. So where do you see this training coming from? And also, how can you measure the yield of a crop?
Sorry, how can you measure the
yield of a crop, like how much you produce? Which units do you use?
How do we measure the yield? So when I was talking about yields, we measured it in the weight of harvest from a specific area of land over a specific length of time. So we're generally talking about kilograms or grams per square meter per year. So I think that's a good way to measure it. So from a certain piece of land over a year, how much food you can actually get that you eat. So yeah, just the weight of the bits of the crop that you eat. And as for training and skills, so I think on the one hand, growing fruit and veggies is not as complicated as it might sound, but I'm sure many people would disagree with this. Growing very efficiently, that certainly requires skill and experience. So I'm probably not the best person to ask, like how to efficiently grow food, because personally I don't have much experience in this. But I think it's really important to just learn, for people to just learn from each other. And in most cases, I think the practices that have worked for people in a certain area are the ones that will probably work for others there as well. And using varieties of crops that are well adapted to an area, that can be a really important part of it. So it's just, in general, I'd say it's best to ask around and really ask for advice of people who have more experience. And other than that, sometimes it really is just trial and error. Some things work, sometimes it doesn't work, but it's a learning process, really.
Thank you. And we want to ask B. Springwood if she would like to ask her question.
Your microphone should be unmuted now, so if you just click at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, hi.
It's a comment, really. I thought the questions that people had about soil and air pollution and so on, they would be maybe better addressed to the Soil Association or to Garden Organic. And there's lots of information there about, you know, the relative merits of growing organically, and then what happens when you've got pollutants or other things in the soil and how to build up your soil. But it's not really in your remit for this, just when you're looking at how much is grown, is it? So I'd recommend those websites and those.
Thank you, that was very useful.
Thank you very much. And so continuing with the list of questions from Lad, we have, is there any north-south divide in how much food can be grown in urban environments because of climate? And
sorry,
also,
could you repeat the question? What was the beginning of the question?
So is there a north and south divide in how much food is grown in urban environments because of climate?
Right, that's an interesting question. I think there probably is, but honestly, I don't know. I think there would be a really big difference in the types of things that people grow as well. So I'm not sure, but it will be interesting to know.
Yeah, let us know if you find anything there in data. So another question.
Yeah, because obviously it's a trade-off between obviously where there's more light available, that's good for the plants, but then if it's also a really dry climate, then that's not so good for plant production. So it can really go both ways with that. Anyway, sorry, what's the next question then?
That's fine. The next question from Lat as well was, how much more productive is it to grow crops under glass or in polytunnels, addressing these climate variations?
Yeah, so those things can really help with growing things in the winter, for example, but I don't know like how much really in terms of like how much more can you grow by using a polytunnel. I don't really know if there's been much research on this actually, but they can certainly help.
Great. So we just have 10 minutes left for Q&A, so I'll try to go quick with the next questions. We have from Jade Clark, how the growers can share best practices. Do you have like a network in which you can share that information or any recommendation?
Yeah, that's actually a really important point. So I know that many allotment associations have these like communities where people would share their best practices and advice and just like help each other, but actually I don't think there are many like larger networks for people. So we were actually thinking about adding this sort of community aspect to the MYHarvest project as well, because at the moment, even though many people from across the country are contributing, they don't really have a means to connect with each other and share information. So we are considering setting up like a community section to the website and probably starting a community Facebook group for MYHarvest participants as well, and this will be obviously open to anyone who wants to take part. So yes, I think this would be a really important step forward with this, so that people can share their successes and failures and really advice and best practices as well.
Great. Well, just in of time, then any question that we are not able to discuss right now, please feel free to send to myharvest@sheffield.ac.uk and So the next question was, is urban horticulture more or less water efficient in comparison with conventional agriculture from Adam?
Again, I don't know. I don't have any figures on this at the top of my head, so I can't say like how much more or less efficient it is. But in general, I believe that urban agriculture or just small scale growing in general is more efficient in using water and in using resources in general. But I can't really support this with any data, but I would say in general, yes.
Okay, maybe later on when you have the analysis of the whole project, you can mention that as well. So
I can ask around in the team if anyone has data on it.
Yeah, if anybody has any more information, please share it with our speaker. I think she will be thrilled to have more. So the next question is there any data on how frequent the use of pesticides or fertilizers are for home growing compared to commercial growing, and what are the risks to health or the environment?
I am not aware of any data on this. I might be wrong, but I'm not sure if there is. It would be interesting to know. Again, I would assume, but really just assume that that urban growers don't use these like harsh or more artificial agrochemicals as frequently as they're being used in commercial production. So just by knowing that half of the people who take part in MYHarvest use organic methods, that by definition means that they don't use any of these chemicals. So that kind of suggests that it is not that frequent, but I don't know if there is any actual data on this.
And on that note, we have a question from Cass, who asks do you think making an allotment profitable then would incentivize people to have these practices, and would there be any kind of regulation about farming practices and soil erosion and fertilizers, pesticides and things? Did you see that path coming?
So as for the regulation, I don't think there are any regulations on what people do in their garden, or I'm not sure about allotments really. I don't think there are really regulations on this, but there might be. I'm really unsure about this, to be honest.
Maybe that's
sorry, what was the first?
Sorry.
Sorry, what was the first part of this question? There was something else.
Just, so if the having an allotment.
Oh, is it the allotments being profitable?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Would that be an incentive?
Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure what they mean by this. So I think that in most cases you will have an annual rent for your plot, right? So if, for example, it's costing you £50 a year, then obviously it would be nice if the food that you grow on it would be saving you at least that much money, which I think is certainly possible, but I'm not sure if it always actually happens for people. But I think even if it's not trying to find the right words for here. So most people don't grow their food, I think, at least, to save money, but really for the joy of it and for being engaged with nature or with other growers. So I think even if they're not growing a massive amount of food and not saving much money, it's still worth it for them. I think, but certainly if it was like financially more profitable for people, then I suppose it would possibly encourage more people to get involved.
And I think our final question for today, because of time, would be from Peter, who asked if there is any data taking into account the weather of the year. So maybe if it was a good weather, then would you compare that to good or bad yield from the crops and the variety of the harvest?
Yeah, so we ourselves didn't collect any data on weather, but obviously there is weather data available. And we are planning, well, I am planning to look at different aspects of the weather and then try and find if there is any relationship between that and the yields of different crops, because presumably different crops would be affected differently, and different regions as well would be affected differently by weather variations. But it's just quite tricky because there are so many factors that influence crop yields that it's really difficult sometimes to pin it down to one specific factor. So even if there seemed to be a relationship, it might not actually be just that, but a combination of many other factors that we couldn't possibly take into consideration. So it's quite complicated, but it's certainly interesting to investigate.
Great, thank you very much for all the answers and going through this drill with us. So
thank you. Sorry, I couldn't answer all of them.
Thank you everybody for the questions. They have been very interesting. Because of time, we will have to hand over to Manasi to closure this session, but we are collating all the questions. So please, if you have any other doubts, just write them up and we'll make the best effort to answer them. The recording of the session will also be sent to all the attendees, so you can have that as a backup. And yeah, over to you, Manasi.
Thanks, Phoebe, and thank you all for joining us today. And thank you all those who supported the event. And thank you, Zilla, for giving such a nice talk, as well as very patiently answering all the questions by the attendees. So
thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. So I think we all would like to see you in our next webinar, which is on 12th of February by Miriam and Christine. And I hope you have a nice evening. So with this, we can close the session and see you on 12th.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And also, you're welcome to come to the next webinar on 12th of February, and have a nice weekend.